Rockstar Games has never been shy about pushing boundaries. They've given us criminal empires, Wild West shootouts, and cities filled with violence and chaos. But there's one game, one brutal, controversial, and infamous title that has been locked away in the depths of gaming history: Manhunt. And in this video, I'm going to tell you how exactly this series can be revived. And when we're done, you'll agree that this revival idea feels so obvious that it's a wonder why Rockstar hasn't done this ages ago. But first, for those of you who somehow don't know what Manhunt is, hi, welcome to the first video you're watching of mine. Originally released in 2003, Manhunt was unlike anything else. It wasn't just another generic horror game. This was designed to make you feel like you were living through the slow and brutal events of a snuff film. And in the case of Manhunt 2 on the Wii, you also had to physically act the part. Gotta love those motion controls. But staying on focus, in Manhunt 1 you play as James Earl Cash, a death row inmate who finds himself at the mercy of a twisted director who forces him to kill for entertainment. The gameplay revolves around stealth, brutal executions, and with a dark and oppressive atmosphere, and the controversies were immediate. Bans, outrage, debates over gaming's moral limits, and since Manhunt 2 pushed those boundaries even further, Rockstar hasn't touched the franchise since. But unlike Rockstar, we haven't forgotten about this game, and in this video I'm going to tell you how they could possibly bring this series back without sparking outrage or getting banned. First, a little refresher on the story. Manhunt puts you in the shoes of James Earl Cash, a death row inmate who was supposed to be executed, but instead wakes up to the voice of the famous movie director Lionel Starkweather, who is also an infamous snuff film creator in Carcer City. Cash quickly realizes he's been thrown into a twisted game, where survival means putting on a show, Starkweather's show. The goal is simple: make it out alive. But to do that, Cash has to navigate the rundown streets of Carcer City, sneaking through alleyways, abandoned buildings, and blood-soaked gang territories. Meanwhile, Starkweather has employed violent gangs to hunt down Cash, and the only way to survive is to take them out first. Quietly, brutally, and most importantly, by any means necessary. The game is linear, guiding Cash from one deadly location to the next, including such places as a junkyard, gang-controlled streets, a shopping mall, and eventually Starkweather's mansion. Stealth is key, executions are grim, and the whole experience feels like one long descent into madness. Now, of course, Rockstar could make a generic open-world game with driving, an insane amount of weapons, and basically just make Grand Theft Auto play as a random gang member. But as stated right there, that wouldn't be Manhunt. That's Grand Theft Auto. Manhunt isn't overly long. It's claustrophobic, cramped, filled with enemies around every dark corner, and it is very limiting. You can't just buy a machine gun and make quick work of a dozen men. You can't run circles around the enemies and melee kill them with ease. You need to take your time, be careful, and hope, for your sake, that the one guy you're going after doesn't spot you. Because unlike a Grand Theft Auto game, 2 or more enemies on top of you at once could very easily be a death sentence. In my opinion, the best way to keep the Manhunt spirit alive isn't by hopping in with a new game. Well, an entirely new game. But instead by remaking the first. Now, just to get this out of the way, I by no means am even slightly referring to giving Manhunt the definitive edition treatment. We all saw just how bad the GTA trilogy was. No, I am not talking about that. But what I am saying is that Manhunt deserves the Resident Evil treatment.
Attention all citizens.
Dr. Birkin, you'll come along with us quietly.
You can stop right there.
To those of you unfamiliar, Capcom's approach to the Resident Evil remakes is more than just a graphical upgrade. It's a full reimagining. They rebuild the games from the ground up, enhancing visuals, modernizing gameplay, refining mechanics, and sometimes reworking story elements to make everything feel fresh, while respecting the originals. The remakes of Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 introduced smoother controls, updated character designs, improved AI, and more immersive environments, all without losing the core horror and intensity that made the original so special. Players such as myself love these remakes because they feel like the best versions of the original games, bringing back the nostalgia, but with a level of polish and depth that make them work in today's gaming landscape. The success of these remakes has proven that older titles can be revived and improved without losing their identity, and so I believe applying this formula to Manhunt could only mean great things. It would mean overhauling the visuals, refining the stealth mechanics, expanding the environments while keeping the game's tight linear progression, and maybe even reworking certain story beats to feel more cinematic. Just imagine Carcer City brought to life with modern graphics, more realistic AI, and animations that make the tension hit even harder. Done right, it could resurrect Manhunt in a way that feels fresh and terrifying, just like how Capcom successfully revived Resident Evil. Well, the originals. I mean, it has been going on forever. Now, one thing that made Manhunt work so well was its tight linear progression, forcing you down a brutal claustrophobic path that never lets up. But imagine if Rockstar adapted the Resident Evil 4 remake's approach to world design. A connected city where you still follow a linear path towards your final destination, but with the freedom to backtrack, to explore, to uncover hidden content. Carcer City is the perfect setting for this. It's not something big and flashy like Los Santos. It's already decayed, ridden with crime, filled with gang territories, abandoned streets, and it has Starkweather's twisted influence lurking in every shadow. Instead of feeling like isolated levels, the city would be structured as a semi-open world, where areas naturally link together. You might be able to go from the junkyard to some slums, traverse the abandoned shopping mall, hit the Carcer Zoo, ride on the train, eventually reach Starkweather's mansion. You get the picture. This could all be accomplished without restrictive loading screens separating the districts. This will still keep the tension high while making the world feel more immersive, allowing players to navigate back to previous locations to scavenge supplies or encounter new threats. Expanding the map like this would also create opportunities for collectibles, and also side content, which only adds to the experience. In the original Manhunt, once you moved on from one area to the next, it's gone. You couldn't return, find weapons, explore, none of that. But with a more connected Carcer City, Rockstar could introduce collectibles tied to the game's eerie atmosphere, like maybe Starkweather's discarded film reels, hidden recordings from past victims, disturbing newspaper clippings that give insight into the city's downfall. And as for side quests, they could be another huge addition. Just a couple examples: helping a homeless survivor, kind of based off of the drunk driving mission. Maybe a stranded hobo requests your help getting safely from one part of the city to the other, and in return for getting them there safely, they might reward you with some ammo, a weapon, or maybe information on where a collectible is. Another example includes gang contracts. This one's pretty basic. A gang member has a personal vendetta against somebody, and cash is offered a reward in exchange for killing them. And a final example is scavenger missions. Some characters might ask for specific items to be retrieved, like medical supplies, a lost stash, or maybe leaning into the more thematic things. Maybe it's like drugs or a porno magazine. And in exchange for doing this, maybe they reward you with some weapons or resources. None of this would take away from Manhunt's core experience. They'd only reinforce the grim, violent world Rockstar created. The tension would remain, as side missions wouldn't mean safety. Heck, Starkweather could even send out the Cerberus or War Dogs if you take too long on the main objective. And also, respawning enemies would make every trip back and forth just as dangerous as the first, keeping the horror intact. And the survival elements such as limited resources, brutal stealth kills, and oppressive environments would keep the gameplay from turning into an action game. By merging Manhunt's brutal stealth horror with Resident Evil 4's world design, Rockstar could craft a remake that feels expansive but never loses the suffocating atmosphere or feel of the original. It would be the perfect balance between evolution and preservation, giving players more ways to engage with Carcer City while still keeping them constantly on edge. Now, that's all well and good, but what about the gore and violence? One of the biggest talking points surrounding this game is just how graphic it is, but it really isn't. Back in 2003, Manhunt definitely pushed boundaries. It was unsettling, raw, and designed to make you feel uncomfortable. Not to mention that this game's executions were some of the most violent things ever seen in gaming at the time, and the controversy surrounding them made headlines. But fast forward to today, and the landscape has changed dramatically.
So gross! You know what? I don't think I needed this game in high def.
If you compare Manhunt to modern games like the Outlast Trials, where grotesque torture is front and center, or the Mortal Kombat series, which has been serving up over-the-top fatalities for decades, Manhunt's executions don't feel nearly as extreme. And actually, when compared to Mortal Kombat, they just don't compare. A Manhunt remake could easily scale the violence to match today's standards, while still keeping its core identity intact. Games like the Resident Evil remakes have already set a precedent for this, with brutal, realistic horror that enhances immersion, without feeling too excessive. Manhunt wouldn't need to go beyond what Resident Evil did in terms of gore. And also, stealth kills would still be a major part of the gameplay, instead of over-the-top carnage. Rockstar could focus on atmospheric horror, making each encounter feel intense without relying on shock value. For all the controversy that surrounded Manhunt, a remake wouldn't even come close to being as violent as Mortal Kombat. And at this point, the outrage that once surrounded Manhunt would likely feel outdated compared to what's considered normal in horror and action games today. With all of this said, I believe by following the Resident Evil remake formula, Rockstar could not only bring Manhunt back from the dead, but potentially establish their own major horror series. The Manhunt remake could serve as a perfect foundation, a modernized, reimagined version of the original that introduces players to Carcer City, its bleak atmosphere, and its brutal stealth-focused gameplay. This could prove the viability of a Manhunt revival while setting the stage for future entries. From there, Rockstar could easily expand the series with new games based on Starkweather's other snuff films. Each installment could introduce a new protagonist, a new disturbing scenario, and different threats, all the while keeping the franchise's signature grim tone. Familiar faces from the original could even reappear, such as Pigsy, Ramirez, or the White Rabbit, whether in twisted new ways or maybe being the player character. This kind of approach would make Manhunt feel less like an isolated relic from the past, and more like a horror franchise that grows and evolves. Bringing Manhunt back with this kind of vision could give them a horror IP that stands alongside their other iconic games, and at a fraction of the cost too. With the right execution, Rockstar wouldn't just be reviving Manhunt, they would be creating the foundation for their own modern horror legacy. And I can't believe they have not tried this idea yet. Well everyone, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have your own ideas for a Manhunt reboot or maybe a Manhunt 3, feel free to share them in the comments below. Here's hoping Manhunt's not dead forever. Have a nice day.